1958, the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas. Backstage after a sold-out Rat Pack performance, Frank Sinatra was on a tirade. Someone had made a mistake during the show. A lighting cue was missed, throwing off a crucial moment in Frank's big number. Frank was furious, screaming at the crew, threatening to fire people, his face red with rage. Dean Martin stood quietly in the corner, watching his best friend tear into people who'd made an honest mistake. The crew members were visibly shaken, some near tears. Frank's anger was legendary, and when he exploded like this, people's jobs, and sometimes careers, ended. Finally, Frank turned to Dean, apparently expecting support or agreement. "Can you believe this? These idiots nearly ruined the whole show. Dino, back me up here. This is unacceptable." What Dean Martin did next shocked Frank Sinatra into complete silence, and revealed a fundamental difference between two men who seemed identical on the surface, but were profoundly different underneath. Dean looked Frank dead in the eye and said quietly, "Frank, shut up and leave them alone." What happened in the next 60 seconds would challenge their friendship, force Frank to confront his own behavior, and teach everyone watching what real strength looks like. And it's not always the loudest voice in the room. Before we explore this incredible moment that showed the true character of both men, smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This isn't just about two entertainers. It's about standing up to powerful friends when they're wrong and having the courage to be the calm voice in a storm of anger. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and let's begin. The Rat Pack dynamic. By 1958, the Rat Pack was at the height of its power. Frank Sinatra was the undisputed leader, the chairman of the board. His word was law. When Frank said jump, everyone from casino owners to Hollywood executives asked, "How high?" Dean Martin was Frank's best friend and the second most prominent member of the group. On the surface, they seemed similar. Both Italian-American singers from working-class backgrounds who'd made it to the top of show business. Both were cool, confident, talented, and magnetic on stage. But beneath the surface, they were fundamentally different people. Frank was volcanic, passionate, intense, demanding perfection, quick to anger, and quicker to hold grudges. He expected excellence from everyone around him and had no patience for mistakes or excuses. His temper was legendary. People walked on eggshells around him. Dean was the opposite. He was laid back, forgiving, easy to work with, and rarely raised his voice. He believed in doing your best, but understood that mistakes happened. Where Frank saw incompetence, Dean saw humanity. These differences had complemented each other beautifully in their partnership. Frank's intensity and Dean's calmness balanced each other. Frank pushed for excellence. Dean kept everyone from burning out under the pressure. But these differences also meant that occasionally they'd clash, especially when Frank's anger crossed lines that Dean couldn't ignore. Frank's legendary temper. Frank Sinatra's temper was one of Hollywood's worst-kept secrets. He'd thrown drinks at photographers, punched reporters, fired staff members over minor infractions, and had been known to hold grudges for decades against people who'd crossed him. His rages were particularly bad when it came to performance. Frank took his craft seriously, perhaps too seriously. A missed cue, a wrong note, a technical problem during a show was, in Frank's mind, a personal betrayal. He demanded perfection because he gave perfection, and anything less was unacceptable. The crew at the Sands Hotel knew this. They were terrified of Frank. They triple-checked everything before his shows. They'd stay late to ensure every detail was perfect. But despite their best efforts, mistakes occasionally happened because they were human, and humans make mistakes. Frank didn't accept that. In his worldview, there were no excuses. You either did the job right or you didn't deserve the job. Dean's philosophy. Dean Martin, by contrast, treated crew members like family. He learned their names. He asked about their kids. He tipped generously and thanked people for their work. When mistakes happened, Dean would joke about them or just move on without making a big deal. "It's just a show," Dean would tell people. "We're here to have fun and entertain people. If something goes wrong, we adjust and keep going." Nobody died. This philosophy drove Frank crazy sometimes. "How can you be so casual about excellence?" Frank would ask. Dean's response was always the same. "Because I know the difference between excellence and perfectionism. Excellence is doing your best. Perfectionism is making everyone miserable chasing something that doesn't exist." Their different philosophies had caused minor tensions before, but never a major confrontation. Dean usually let Frank have his explosions and then quietly fixed whatever damage Frank had done. But this night would be different. The mistake that started everything. The show had been going perfectly. The Rat Pack was in top form. Frank, Dean, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop all hitting their marks, getting big laughs, killing with the musical numbers. The audience was eating it up. Then came Frank's big solo. I've Got You Under My Skin, one of his signature songs. It was supposed to be a dramatic moment, with specific lighting that would spotlight Frank while dimming everything else. But the lighting operator, a young man named Tommy who'd been working at the Sands for only 3 months, missed his cue. Instead of the spotlight on Frank, the stage stayed fully lit for the first 10 seconds of the song. By the time Tommy realized his mistake and corrected it, the moment's magic was gone. The audience didn't really notice. The song was still beautiful. Frank's voice was perfect. The rest of the show went smoothly. From the audience's perspective, it was a triumph. But Frank had noticed. And backstage, he was going to make sure everyone knew about it. The backstage explosion. The moment the curtain came down, Frank was already shouting, "Where's Tommy? Where's the lighting guy? Get him over here now." Tommy appeared, pale and shaking. He knew he'd messed up. "Mr. Sinatra, I'm so sorry. I was watching the wrong. I don't want to hear your excuses." Frank's voice echoed through the backstage area. "You had one job. One. And you couldn't even do that. Do you know how many people would kill for your job? And you're standing here telling me you weren't paying attention." The other crew members had frozen, trying to be invisible. They'd all been on the receiving end of Frank's anger at various times. They knew it was brutal. "Mr. Sinatra, please, it won't happen again." "You're damn right it won't happen again because you're fired. Get your things and get out. I don't want to see your face again." Tommy's face crumbled. This job was supporting his family. His wife was pregnant with their second child. Losing it would be devastating. "Please, Mr. Sinatra. I need this job. I've got a family. Should have thought about that before you ruined my number." Dean's line in the sand. Dean had been watching this entire exchange from the doorway to his dressing room. He'd seen Frank explode before. He'd seen Frank fire people before. Usually Dean stayed out of it. Frank's anger would burn out. He'd often rehire the person later once he'd calmed down, and life would go on. But something about this situation bothered Dean. Tommy was young, maybe 22 or 23. He'd made an honest mistake. He had a family, and Frank was destroying him over a lighting cue that the audience hadn't even noticed. Dean also saw something else, the other crew members looking terrified, wondering if they'd be next. This wasn't just about Tommy anymore. This was about Frank's need to dominate and intimidate everyone around him. Dean made a decision. He walked over to where Frank stood over Tommy, who looked like he might cry. "Frank," Dean said quietly. Frank turned, still furious. "Not now, Dino. I'm handling this." "Frank, shut up and leave him alone." The room went completely silent. Nobody told Frank Sinatra to shut up. Nobody. Even his closest friends knew better than to challenge him when he was in this kind of rage. Frank stared at Dean, apparently unable to believe what he'd just heard. "What did you just say to me?" Dean's voice remained calm and steady. "I said shut up and leave him alone. The kid made a mistake. It happens." The show was still great. Nobody in the audience even noticed. "You're blowing this way out of proportion." The confrontation. Frank's face turned even redder. "Are you serious right now? You're defending this incompetence." "I'm defending a young man who made an honest mistake and doesn't deserve to lose his job over it. He ruined my number. He missed a lighting cue by 10 seconds, Frank. Your number was still perfect. Your voice was still perfect. The audience loved it. The only person who thinks it was ruined is you." Frank stepped closer to Dean, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that people who knew him feared more than his shouting. "This is none of your business, Dean." Dean didn't back down or break eye contact. "Yes, it is. We're a team. When you treat crew members like garbage, that affects all of us. These people work their asses off for us. They deserve respect, not to be terrorized because of a minor mistake." "Minor? Minor? Do you have any idea?" "Frank," Dean interrupted, his voice still calm but firm. "You need to hear this. You're not always right. You're not God. You're just a singer like me. A very talented singer, but still just a guy who stands on a stage and sings songs. Get over yourself." The room was frozen. Dean had just said what everyone thought but nobody dared to say. Frank Sinatra was not God. He was just a man who was being cruel to someone who didn't deserve it. Frank's shock. For a long moment, Frank just stared at Dean. People who were there said later that you could see multiple emotions flash across Frank's face. Anger, shock, disbelief, and something else. Maybe hurt that his best friend was calling him out in front of everyone. "I can't believe you're doing this," Frank said quietly. "I can't believe I have to," Dean replied. "You're better than this, Frank. Or at least you should be." Frank turned back to Tommy, who was watching this exchange with wide eyes. For a moment, it looked like Frank might double down, like he might fire Tommy just to prove that Dean couldn't tell him what to do. But then something unexpected happened. The shocking response. Frank looked at Tommy, then back at Dean, then back at Tommy. When he spoke, his voice was different. Not kind, but not hostile either. "Just tired. Get out of here, Tommy. But if you miss another cue, I won't be so forgiving." Tommy practically ran from the room, relief evident on his face. The other crew members started to disperse, sensing the worst was over. But Frank wasn't done. He turned back to Dean, and for a moment, everyone thought the real fight was about to start. Dean had challenged Frank's authority in front of the crew. Frank had to respond somehow, or risk looking weak. What Frank said next shocked everyone, maybe even Dean. "You're right." Dean blinked. "What?" "You're right," Frank repeated, his voice barely audible. "I was out of line. The kid made a mistake. It wasn't worth destroying his life over." Then Frank did something nobody had ever seen him do. He walked away without another word, went into his dressing room, and closed the door quietly. No slam, no dramatic exit, just a quiet retreat. Dean stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. Then he turned to the remaining crew members. "Sorry you all had to see that. Why don't you take the rest of the night off with pay? You've earned it." The aftermath. Word of what happened spread through the Vegas entertainment community like wildfire. Dean Martin had stood up to Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra had backed down. Both of these things were unprecedented. The story got embellished in the retelling. Some versions had Dean and Frank getting into a physical fight. Others claimed Frank fired Dean from the Rat Pack. Neither was true. What actually happened was more subtle and more significant. For the next few days, Frank and Dean didn't speak. Not out of anger. They just needed space to process what had happened. Frank had been forced to confront his own behavior and admit he was wrong. Dean had risked his most important friendship to stand up for what was right. The conversation that healed the rift. 3 days later, Frank called Dean's hotel room at 2 a.m. "You awake, Dino?" "I am now." "What's up, Frank?" "I've been thinking about what happened backstage." Dean waited. "I hate that you were right. I hate that you called me out in front of everyone." "But," Frank paused, "you were the only one who would. Everyone else is too scared of me. You're the only friend I have who'll tell me when I'm being an asshole." "Someone needs to," Dean said gently. "I know. That's why I need you around, Dino. Not just as a performer. As someone who keeps me honest. You're not an easy man to tell the truth to, Frank. I know. But don't stop. Please. I need at least one person who's not afraid of me." Dean smiled in the darkness of his room. "I got you, Pally." The change dynamic. From that night on, something shifted in Frank and Dean's relationship. Frank still had his moments of anger. That wasn't going to change. But when he went too far, Dean would give him a look, and Frank would rein himself in. The crew at the Sands noticed the change. Frank was still demanding, still expected excellence, but he was less cruel about mistakes. He'd catch himself mid-tirade sometimes, glance at Dean, and tone it down. Years later, Sammy Davis Jr. would tell an interviewer, "Dean saved Frank from himself that night. Frank was becoming a tyrant, and everybody was too scared to call him on it. Dean loved Frank enough to risk the friendship by telling him the truth." That's real friendship right there. Tommy's gratitude. Tommy, the young lighting operator, continued working at the Sands Hotel. He became one of their best technicians, partly because the near disaster taught him to be meticulous, but mostly because he was grateful for the second chance. Years later, Tommy told a reporter, "Dean Martin saved my career and probably my marriage that night. I was about to lose everything over one mistake. Mr. Martin stood up to Frank Sinatra for me, a nobody lighting guy. I never forgot that." Tommy worked in Vegas for the next 30 years. He trained dozens of other technicians and always told them the story of Dean standing up to Frank. "That's what integrity looks like," he'd say. "Dean Martin had nothing to gain and a lot to lose by defending me. He did it anyway because it was right." The lesson Frank learned. Frank Sinatra's temper didn't disappear after that night. You don't change your fundamental personality overnight. But something shifted in how he expressed that anger. Frank started to distinguish between mistakes that came from carelessness and mistakes that came from human error. He was still hard on people who didn't try, who showed up unprepared, who took their jobs lightly. But for people who were trying their best and made honest mistakes, he got better. Not perfect, not even close, but better. Frank later told a friend, "Dean taught me something that night. He taught me that being powerful doesn't mean being cruel. I can demand excellence without destroying people who fall short. It took me until I was 43 years old to learn that lesson, and I needed my best friend to teach it to me." How it changed their friendship. Paradoxically, that confrontation made Frank and Dean's friendship stronger. Frank now knew that Dean would tell him the truth even when it was hard. Dean knew that Frank could be reached, even in his anger, if someone was brave enough to try. Their dynamic on stage remained the same. Frank was still the leader, Dean was still the cool sidekick. But off stage, Dean became Frank's conscience, the voice that would quietly say, "Ease up, Frank," when Frank was going too far. Peter Lawford later commented, "Frank respected Dean more than anyone else in the Rat Pack. Not because Dean was the most talented, though he was incredibly talented, but because Dean was the only one who wasn't afraid of Frank. Frank surrounded himself with yes men, but Dean was a no man when he needed to be." The ripple effect. That confrontation had effects beyond just Frank and Dean's relationship. Other Rat Pack members felt empowered to push back when Frank was being unreasonable. Not aggressively. They didn't have Dean's courage or Frank's deep respect, but they'd gently suggest alternatives or defend people when Frank was being too harsh. Frank's behavior became the stuff of legend in Vegas, but the legend changed. Instead of just stories about Frank's volcanic temper, there were also stories about Dean's calm intervention, about Frank's willingness to listen to Dean, about how their friendship was built on honesty rather than just shared success. Young performers coming up in Vegas would hear both sides of the story. Yes, Frank Sinatra was demanding and could be brutal. But he also respected people who stood up to him, and if you were right, he'd listen. Real strength is staying calm. Dean Martin's reaction to Frank Sinatra's explosion teaches us profound lessons about leadership, friendship, and courage. 1. Real strength is staying calm when others lose control. In a room full of people cowering from Frank's rage, Dean stayed calm. He didn't match Frank's volume or anger. He spoke quietly and firmly. That calmness made his words more powerful than any shouting could have been. In our own lives, when everyone around us is panicking or angry, the strongest response is often to remain calm and centered. Calm doesn't mean passive. Dean was anything but passive. Calm means responding thoughtfully rather than reacting emotionally. 2. True friends tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. Dean risked his most important friendship to tell Frank an uncomfortable truth. That's what real friends do. They don't enable bad behavior. They don't stay silent to keep the peace. They speak up, even when it's hard. How many of our friendships are built on always agreeing, never challenging, keeping everything smooth? Those aren't deep friendships. Those are acquaintanceships with a fancy label. 3. You can disagree with someone without disrespecting them. Notice that Dean didn't attack Frank personally. He didn't call Frank names or question his character. He simply said, "You're wrong about this specific thing, and you need to stop." That's the art of productive confrontation. Address the behavior, not the person. You're being cruel, not you're a cruel person. That distinction matters. 4. Power doesn't give you the right to be cruel. Frank was at the height of his power. He could have fired everyone in that room and had replacements by morning. But Dean reminded him that power comes with responsibility, not permission to abuse people. In any position of authority, manager, parent, teacher, leader, we have power over others. The question is, do we use that power to elevate people or dominate them? 5. Admitting you're wrong is stronger than never being wrong. Frank's willingness to say, "You're right," and walk away was more impressive than if he'd never lost his temper in the first place. Perfection is impossible. What matters is how we respond when we fall short. Frank could have doubled down, fired Tommy anyway, and punished Dean for the disrespect. Instead, he admitted he was wrong and changed his behavior. That's strength. The modern relevance. We live in a culture that often celebrates loudness and aggression as strength. The person who yells the loudest, who dominates the room, who never backs down, that's who we often think of as strong. Dean Martin showed us a different kind of strength. The strength to stay calm under pressure, to to stand up to powerful friends, to risk important relationships for what's right, and to do all of it without raising your voice. Frank Sinatra showed us another kind of strength. The strength to admit when you're wrong, to let your friends hold you accountable, and to change your behavior even when you have all the power. Together, they modeled what healthy relationships look like. Not agreements all the time, but honest confrontation handled with respect. What this means for you. You probably don't have Frank Sinatra's fame or Dean Martin's cool, but you'll face similar moments. When your boss is mistreating someone, do you speak up or stay silent? When your friend is being cruel, do you call them out or laugh along? When you have power over others, do you use it to elevate or dominate? When someone tells you you're wrong, do you listen or double down? Dean and Frank showed us how to handle these moments with integrity. Your turn. If this story changed how you think about strength, friendship, and standing up to powerful people, smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Share this with someone who needs to hear that real courage isn't about being the loudest. It's about being the calmest voice of truth in the room. Drop a comment. Have you ever had to stand up to a powerful friend or boss? How did they react? What did you learn? Remember, Dean Martin shocked Frank Sinatra by staying calm, speaking truth, and refusing to back down, all without raising his voice. That's what real strength looks like. And Frank shocked everyone by admitting he was wrong and changing his behavior. That's what real friendship allows. Be Dean when you need to stand up. Be Frank when you need to admit you're wrong. See you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring the human stories that teach us what real strength, friendship, and integrity actually look like.